During the early years of the Cold War, in the scramble to defend the nation, the Pentagon played no favorites with the branches of the armed forces. Wherever it saw an advantage possible, the money flowed into that program. The Navy saw this and was feeling very left out. At the time, the Air Force was clearly the place that the Pentagon saw the biggest advantage. Money was poured into developing the newest and greatest bombers and fighters, most being configured to carry the atomic weapons, which were also being improved at breakneck speeds. The entire military landscape was changing. It was becoming something that the world had never seen before. The Air Force almost had a complete monopoly on the ability to perform a nuclear strike. The Navy wanted in on the action. In a bid to get back into the spotlight, the Navy began a project to develop its own strategic bomber. At first, they toyed with the idea of a carrier-based plane, but that soon proved to be a dead-end strategy due to the clear supremacy of the SAC bomber fleets that were already in service, so it was back to the drawing board for the Navy. But soon, a plan was thought up to develop a jet-powered seaplane that was configured to be a bomber. The Navy saw this as a unique strategic plan that would free bomber fleets from being tied to land-based, easily identifiable and targeted air bases. You could field an air wing of seaplane bombers anywhere you had a large enough body of water to land on. Suddenly, a new term was being tossed around inside of Pentagon meetings: Seaplane Strike Force. And soon after, the most ambitious seaplane ever planned in the United States came about, the Martin P6M SeaMaster. The Navy wanted a plane that would directly compete against the new B-52 Stratofortress, which was no easy task, especially for a seaplane. The Navy daydreamed about a strike force of P6M SeaMaster seaplanes that could carry out nuclear strike missions all around the world from virtually any body of water large enough to accommodate their taking off and landing. The design of the plane began in 1953 after the Navy delivered its requirement for a high-performance, multi-role flying boat. Martin began work on the project, dubbing it the Martin Model 275. The plane had a high wing set, sharply swept at 40 degrees. The four Allison J71 turbojet engines were mounted above the wing to minimize spray ingestion at takeoff and landing. The engines produced around 13,000 pounds of thrust each. The first P6M to fly took off on July 14, 1955. After a brief period of testing, it was found that the engines were angled inward too much and scorched the skin of the aircraft, so the engines needed adjusting. Despite early testing being successful, on December 7, 1955, just 2 days after the death of the company's founder, Glenn Martin, a control system fault occurred during a test flight of the first prototype, which resulted in a horizontal tail going to full up. The resulting 9G stress caused the plane to disintegrate at an altitude of 5,000 feet. The debris of the plane crashed into the Potomac River, killing all 4 crew members, including Victor Utgoff, one of the Navy's most experienced seaplane pilots. The second P6M prototype crashed 11 months later in May of 1956 near Odessa, Delaware, due to a faulty elevator jack. The plane nosed up at 21,000 feet and failed to respond to control inputs. The crew was able to eject safely this time. Despite the crashes, no serious flaws were ever found in the flying boat's design. It was a very strong airframe. The aluminum skinning at the wing roots was over an inch thick. The plane was also very fast, demonstrating Mach 0.89 at low-level flight, while its chief land-based competitor, the B-52, could only achieve Mach 0.55. The plane had a max takeoff weight of 190,000 pounds, a range of 2,083 miles, a top speed of 686 miles per hour, and its service ceiling was 50,000 feet. The Navy was happy with testing to date and placed an order for 6 J-71 powered pre-production XP-6M flying boats, then later upped this order to 24 planes. After production began, the engines were upgraded to Pratt & Whitney J75 engines that didn't have afterburners but produced 17,000 pounds of thrust each. SeaMaster's ordnance delivery system was a Martin-specific design also used on the XB-51 and B-57 bombers. It featured a rotary weapons door in the hull that could release bombs or mines at up to 600 miles per hour and didn't suffer from the issues of buffeting the older style bomber doors caused. Ordnance could be replenished from doors that were located on top of the plane. Pneumatic tubes sealed the opening around the bomb bay doors in the hull. The plane could also be refueled via a submarine tanker. There were a few problems, most of them political and logistical. The Eisenhower administration was about to make major defense budget cuts, and the Navy was going to have to make decisions. They also weren't prepared to build the infrastructure that was going to be needed to service, refuel, and maintain a global, water-based bomber fleet. In August of 1959, Martin was told to halt operations. The project was about to be canceled. The P6M was significantly over budget, already costing $2.5 billion in today's dollars, and was majorly behind on its development. Not only that, but it was now competing with aircraft carriers for funding. The Navy was also shifting their tactics. The new focus for a nuclear strike option was the Polaris ballistic missile system. After the project was canceled, all planes produced were scrapped. Martin briefly tried to market the planes for civilian use, but that ended up being a dead-end road as well. Martin finally abandoned the aircraft business altogether in order to shift their company into a missile and electronics business. The P6M would be the fastest flying boat ever built, but it would also be the last aircraft constructed by the Martin Aircraft Company. Alright guys, that's the P6M. I appreciate you watching my videos. Keep liking, keep commenting, keep subscribing. Someone actually commented on one of my videos about 2 weeks ago and actually suggested to do a video about this plane. I'd actually never even heard about it. I've never really been into like flying boats. Very interesting aircraft to say the least. Actually, while I was researching this, I found that there were actually a lot of Soviet flying boats. They kept building them long after the United States pretty much had abandoned the concept. So I'll be doing some videos on those coming up. So keep your eyes open.